Welcome back. Hello and welcome back to the Make It Take It podcast. Today is March 20th, 2024, and I'm your host, Victor Krustin. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ethan Mazel and Gio Salazar, and Jason Maya is on the buttons as our producer. Today on the show, we're going to first do our usual cleaning the glass, talk about current things going around the NBA, current trends, topics, what's going on. And then we're fortunate enough to have a guest today, Ben Ladner, who's a former Indiana student and a beat reporter for the Atlanta Hawks. So we're going to bring him on in a couple minutes after we clean the glass. First thing I want to talk about is the Anthony Edwards dunk. I mean, is that dunk of the year or what?
Dunk of the decade, honestly. I don't know.
It has to be up there, man.
I don't know.
Crazy.
Maybe he could do better than that, but I don't know if anyone else is.
I feel like Ja has had some close ones, but man, Anthony actually finished it, so I'm gonna have to give it to him.
Yeah, like they call him the Ant-Man for a reason. Like he's a true superhero on defense and offense, but it hasn't been enough for the Timberwolves recently. They're 5-5 in their last 10 games. They've been missing Karl Anthony Towns now for 2 weeks. The Nuggets have overtaken them after beating them last night. The Nuggets are 8-2 in their last 10, starting to look like their old kind of championship self, getting hot at the right time. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think the Nuggets are kind of in that fight for the number one seed, and I think the Timberwolves are going to slowly fall out of it without Cat. But overall, I think the Nuggets are great. Obviously, they turn up in the playoffs, so it would be interesting to see how they finish off the season.
Yeah, I mean, the Timberwolves, they don't have Towns, like you said. And I mean, I really believe in the growth of Ant, and I think he's a really big part of why this team has the potential to go further and than they did when Towns was sort of their only guy. I think ultimately the Towns-Gobert combo will end up being weird. It'll end up hurting them in the playoffs, but Ant alone has the potential and the ceiling to be one of those all-time top 10 players in the league right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. One thing I always talk about on this show is you got to have that guy that could win you the game at the end of the game, and I do think Anthony Edwards is that guy. But you bring up a good point. Having two big men can hurt you in the playoffs. Towns maybe forcing him to play inside and Gobert to guard someone on the outside, that could get ugly. But talking about having that guy, Steph just passed Robert Parrish for 30th on the all-time scoring list, but it's not really doing much for this Golden State team. Do we think this team could still be lethal and make a run as a play-in team?
I think they have to worry about making the playoffs first because the Houston Rockets are they're on their tail. So I think it'll have to come down to the supporting cast around Steph. He'll do his thing, obviously, but it really comes down to how much help he gets from his teammates.
With that, about the supporting guys, who do you guys want to see rise up from, whether the bench or even Jonathan Kuminga rise up in order to help Steph Curry with all this stuff?
I like Kuminga a lot. I think he is a really good young player. Him, Pods, Brandon Podziemski, and Trace Jackson Davis, Hoosier's own. Along with Chris Paul, I think they make up a really good bench unit. They sort of float in between bench and the starters. I know they've been doing a lot of Kuminga starting lineups as of late. I think it's a really deep team. But really, there's just no true third or really even second star outside of Steph because Klay does not start that many games anymore. I don't think he has just it as much as he did back 4 or 5 years ago. This Warriors-Lakers 9-10 play-in game, it's going to be incredible. Can't wait.
I mean, we've gotten it before, and it was there's no way it could top that, right? Seeing 3 rims.
Yeah. I think the Warriors, they had an opportunity at the deadline to maybe make a bigger move, and they didn't really. And ultimately, I think this will just go down as a lost season for them in one of Steph's probably final prime years.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I agree. Klay is not the same as what he used to be. He used to be that elite defender, that elite shooter, but he's lost his touch, and he really needs to find it if this team wants to make another deep run. But there's another team, kind of young team that has kind of been under the shadows recently, is the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic.
Play the song.
They're 15-5 in their last 20. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I love the Magic. I love what they're doing there with Paolo and Franz Wagner. I think it's a really good young duo that really just has a super high ceiling to elevate their game. I believe that they play really well off each other. And Markelle Fultz is sort of having a career resurgence, unlike anything we saw in Philadelphia. Him and Cole Anthony are a good point guard duo. And it's a really young team, and they're performing really well right now. It sort of reminds me of, just like some of those like good Jazz teams used to have. They'd be like, oh, it's a 50-win Jazz team. They're probably going to be like a 45, 50-win Magic team. And they're just ahead of schedule. They're doing everything right. It's like a slightly worse version of the current Thunder.
Not awful.
Yeah. And I think they got big things ahead in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, I mean, 15-5 in the last 20 is a pretty good record for them. And potential is it's never guaranteed, but you always saw it with this Magic team. So it's nice to see that it actually came to fruition, and they're doing pretty good this year. It'll be interesting to see them in the playoffs too, how they handle it.
Yeah, they have a great group of young guys. And another team in the East, like kind of at the top, is taking a little bit of a hit. Donovan Mitchell is going to miss at least around a week with a nasal fracture. But who knows? Maybe we'll come back and see him be masked Mitchell and just go crazy like players do with the mask. Yeah, what do you think? Is the Cavs going to be able to stick around for this next couple of weeks without him?
I think they'll be all right. They missed him for a decent amount of time earlier in the year. So I think overall, as long as the defense stays as good as it's been playing, that gives you a good chance to win just every night about.
Yeah, I mean, they're only one game behind the Bucks right now for the second seed, and the Bucks are kind of up and down this season as a whole, although they are 7-3 in their last 10. The Cavs, no Mobley, no Donovan Mitchell. They just this whole season has just been a big just mess of health problems for them. And although Karis LeVert is having a good year, they need to get healthy to get back into their winning ways. Although I do think this is a good Cavs team compared to what we've seen in the past LeBron-less years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a major credit to JB Bickerstaff. We talked about this in the prior episode. He was my pick for Coach of the Year. And I know it's not like a sexy pick because, they're the 3 seed. Like, they're not at the top of the standings. But with all the injuries this team has dealt with this year, with honestly, like, the Bucks and Celtics have way better rosters than the Cavs do, and he's still like putting out a winning product every single night. And I think that's a big credit to JB Bickerstaff, and I think he deserves it. But the last thing that, unless you have something to say?
Nah, I thought I did, but I don't.
The last thing we'll talk about before we bring on our guest, a little something, is Isaiah Thomas is making a comeback. Hasn't played in 2 years, but he's been balling in the G League. He makes his debut with the Suns, where he spent 1 year very early in his career against the Sixers. Is he going to make the most of this 10-day contract or what?
Well, it is a short king spring, so I like it. They need some depth off the bench, and hypothetically, he could provide some scoring boost for them when all of their stars are resting off the court. It's just a 10-day low risk, high reward. It's a good signing for the Suns.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of hope he plays to see, how he fares now that he's not been he's been in the G League for a while. So it'll be interesting to see how much he plays and how good he plays.
Yeah, and the Suns are kind of one of those teams that's slipping a little bit, like at the bottom of the West. They could use a little bit of spark. Kind of like the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks are a team that is currently 10th in the East, fighting for a play-in spot. And now is when we're going to bring on our guest, Ben Ladner. He is like I said, former Indiana student and a beat reporter for the Atlanta Hawks. Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are y'all?
Good. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, no problem.
For our viewers, would you give yourself maybe a little brief introduction?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, I graduated from Indiana. I was class of 2019. Went on to cover the Atlanta Hawks for a little while after that. And I live in Atlanta still, and am still an ardent NBA follower and analyst.
So just my first general question, kind of coming from Indiana, like, what was your experience like here with basketball? And I guess, like, did you cover it here? And how has that helped you transition from college to the NBA?
Yeah, I covered a lot of basketball while I was here. I did it sort of freelance, just sort of in the blog world for my first couple of years. Started covering the team my sophomore year, did that for my final 3 years of college, worked with Inside the Hall, did some stuff with the 24/7 site while I was here, and then did some NBA writing for a couple of different blogs around the internet. And so it was kind of my what I ate, slept, and breathed while I was here, and it was a really good experience for me, and I think definitely prepared me in a good way to cover an NBA beat. Helped navigate kind of the rookie learning curve. As in my first year on the beat, I'd already had experience, talking to coaches, talking to players, being at games, understanding how to, comport myself professionally, ask good questions, watch the game in kind of an inquisitive way, and then hopefully write about it in an informative way.
So are you still covering the Hawks? What are you up to nowadays?
No, I'm kind of in the public life now, or the non-public life, I should say, just sort of out living my life, but I still cover the NBA very closely, or cover and watch the NBA very closely. Do some podcast work here and there, and that's about it.
So you talk about your podcast. What are some topics you talk about on your podcast? Like, we're trying to come up with fresh ideas all the time. You got any advice for some people making podcasts like us?
Yeah, well, you kind of hit on some of the ones. I actually just finished recording an episode of that right before I hopped on here. We talked a lot about the Magic. I made the Thunder comparison as well. My co-host did not agree with that. But I made the case for Orlando. I think they're having a really nice season, overachieving. And whatever that means for them long term, I'm not sure. But it's nice this year to kind of see them have some success ahead of schedule. I would say, as far as advice, whether I'm the best person or not to give that, who knows? So take it with a grain of salt if you want. But I would say that I found I enjoyed podcasting much more, and I think got better at it when I structured it less. So just going in with kind of a list of ideas, or maybe just in your own head, a handful of topics that you want to hit. And then just kind of letting the conversation go where it goes. You open it up with something maybe, and then if that spins off into a topic that you didn't expect to cover, you go there with it, and not to follow the script so rigidly, just to kind of let it flow where it goes. And usually what that does is it not only kind of makes it feel a little bit more fluid and a little bit more smooth, but it also takes you into you learn things that you didn't expect to learn. You come away with maybe a deeper understanding of a team or a player or the game in general that you didn't have before. So it's less about you just dispensing the ideas that you already have, and more about using the conversation as a way to go deeper into a topic and to learn more, hopefully follow your curiosity.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good points. Another thing I want to talk about is, I guess, kind of transitioning from being mainly covering the Hawks to now fully kind of just following the NBA. How does that differ, like covering just one specific team to now kind of following the whole NBA and writing about it and keeping, I guess, an opinion that's not towards your fandom?
Yeah, I sort of divorced myself from my Hawks fandom when I got to college. I figured that if I was going to write about the NBA starting my freshman year, that I should probably, and cover the whole league, I should probably, look at it from kind of an objective stance. And maybe I was a little self-serious in having that notion at that time. I think it's okay to be a fan as long as you don't let it affect your analysis too much. I would say at this point, though, I'm not really a fan of any particular team. Maybe the Nuggets. I've liked them for a long time, but certainly has nothing to do with my childhood allegiances or geographic allegiances. But it's definitely a different thing. Like, I got used to covering the whole league in college, and I really enjoyed that because I could kind of just parachute down into a topic, regardless of team, regardless of conference, city, whatever, and really explore that deeply. And then when I was covering the Hawks, I still did that on the side, but it was mainly about covering that one team. And I think I had some experience doing that as well, covering Indiana, obviously. So it was really just about like which well of experience to draw from when I first got the job with SI, and it was more like, okay, I'm going to do this the way that I covered Indiana rather than the way that I covered the NBA. But they always merge together, and you can always take ideas from one thing and apply it to something else. So I just kind of tried to do what I had done for the entire NBA, which is, hopefully thorough and substantive analysis, and just apply it to the one team that I was covering. And just, it makes it a little harder, I guess, to come up with topics and to find new angles on things, because if you're talking about the same thing, you can exhaust that well pretty quickly. But it's just a matter of being creative and being inquisitive and being curious.
So moving over to the NBA today, I want to get your thoughts on the Trae Young DeJounte pairing. How do you feel that has worked out so far and will continue to work out in the future?
Well, I can feel pretty confident saying it hasn't worked the way that the Hawks wanted it to work when they made that trade. When you compare that trade to one that was made earlier in that offseason, the Rudy Gobert trade, you'd have to say that the Gobert trade has worked out much better for Minnesota than the Murray trade has worked out for Atlanta. Part of that, I think, is DeJounte Murray not really being the guy that I think the Hawks thought that he would. Part of it, I think, is that Trae Young has certain limitations as an offensive and defensive player. There's maybe some redundancy there. And part of it is they just don't have amazing infrastructure around those guys to make it work in the way that they want to. With both those guys on the floor this season, over 1,100 minutes, the Hawks are being outscored by over 5 points per 100 possessions with a pretty atrocious defense, which is on par for what their work the entire season. So, Murray was the guy that was brought in to shore up that defense, because obviously Trae Young, as your primary ball handler, you need a defensive guard next to him. So it stands to reason someone like DeJounte Murray would help firm that up, but he really hasn't. And whether that's his fault or the fault of, the infrastructure around him, it's probably a little bit of both, but we can certainly say that DeJounte Murray has not provided the kind of defensive fortification that I think the Hawks expected him to when they made that trade, because the Hawks defense has not really gotten significantly better since they made that trade.
Yeah, that was kind of where my questions were kind of going towards was, why isn't this team working defensively? Because, DeAndre Hunter was this great 3-and-D guy coming out of college. Jalen Johnson's athletic. Okongwu's athletic. You got Capella down low, who's underperforming this year. So I guess what do you think the next steps should be for this team? How do they, I guess, overcome this? Do you have to decide between offense, defense with Trae Young and DeJounte and get rid of one, or do you try to make it work with them?
Man, that's a really tough question. Both the root cause and also what you do with the Trae Murray pairing. I think at this point I would be pretty willing to move on from DeJounte Murray if I were Atlanta, maybe even Trae Young too. I don't know. He's a great player, but I don't think he's the kind of player that you necessarily tie your entire future to. If the right opportunity comes along, I don't think they're looking to shop him necessarily, but Murray, I would be looking to be kind of active and proactive with him. Part of it, I think, is Capella's fallen off as far as like the team defense structure. Part of it is Onyeka Okongwu has been injured at times this season. Part of it is that as good as DeAndre Hunter, I think, has been at moments in his career as an on-ball defender, A, he hasn't been super consistent. B, he's been banged up throughout his career. And C, he's not really a great team defender. He's not a great help defender. So as you can kind of stick him on an on-ball guy. I remember his rookie year, he guarded James Harden really well in a game against the Rockets in Atlanta. That was sort of like, okay, you can see kind of the physical tools and the lateral mobility that he could be a really good on-ball defender, but he doesn't really make a lot of plays off the ball. He's not really a hawk in the passing lanes, no pun intended. He's not providing a ton of rim protection as a backline guy. And so that kind of guy only has so much utility, I think, in a system without a real defensive anchor. And Capella used to be that guy. He hasn't really been this season. So a player like DeAndre Hunter, and to a lesser extent, like Sadiq Bey and Jalen Johnson, I think just kind of have a little bit less value. Johnson is a really encouraging guy. I think he's been the one bright spot for Atlanta this year. He has shown some of those help instincts, some of that off-ball awareness and activity. But, as a second-year guy, third-year guy, whatever he is, he can really only do so much in that capacity.
So do you feel that there's a world in which DeJounte or Trae Young go to San Antonio? I know that was a big hot topic during the trade deadline. Could you see DeJounte going back to where it all started?
I could see him or Trae. I don't have any any hard reporting on this, obviously, but you've heard those rumors kind of floated out throughout the last few months, particularly around the trade deadline. The Spurs are in a position where they kind of have incentive to accelerate their timeline, given how good Victor Wembanyama's been this season. So, if they feel like a guard like Trae Young, someone who can create for Wembanyama is the kind of player that they need, which I can see the motive for that, because there are like 6 or 7 times a game, if not 10 or 15, when you're watching a Spurs game where Wembanyama just gets himself wide open and does not receive the ball because the Spurs just don't have the kind of passing to get him the ball in those spots. So someone like Trae Young who can really set him up and find him when he makes those off-ball cuts, when he goes backdoor, when he spins baseline, when guys front the post and things like that. I could see that being a pretty good offensive pairing, and then you have enough defense around it that you can kind of get by with Trae's limitations. I could also see them maybe I don't agree with this line of thinking as much, but if they wanted to bring back DeJounte, have him be the primary ball handler and really lean into their defensive identity, I could see that as well. I think that's less likely given that they've already traded DeJounte Murray, and so they've kind of made it clear where they stand on him. And it's not like he's really proven himself as anything different since they traded him. But certainly if the Hawks are ready to move on from Trae Young, the Spurs are one of the first teams I would expect to be hitting their line.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think Trae Young is an amazing fit with Victor Wembanyama. Like, you look at how Trae Young is the most lethal. He just, I feel like remember that Knicks playoff series, he was just driving, throwing lobs or floaters, like something. With Wembanyama, I feel like that'd be unstoppable. But do you feel like that would be like an all-time blow-up reset if they were to trade Trae Young?
I don't think so, because they never really reached like the top of the mountain with him. It's not like they're punting on this guaranteed championship contender if they give up on this, so in some ways it actually kind of makes sense for them to move on from Trae Young, because this is year 6, year 7 of him. And it's not like it's his fault that they haven't, they made the conference finals the one year, but it's not like it's his fault they haven't gotten farther than that entirely. But he also hasn't proven himself to be like a Jokic, a Doncic, a Giannis, one of these guys who you can, let alone a LeBron.
They could have had Luka.
They did. Yeah, for a hot second there, they did have Luka, and then they let him go. Don't forget, they also got Cam Reddish in that trade. How did that go? Yeah. So, and not to pile on the Hawks, but it's not like Trae Young has shown himself to be a top 5 player or anything. So I don't think it would be like a drastic step if they moved on from him. And I think if the right package came along, if a team like the Spurs were desperate enough to maximize the present with Wembanyama, they could actually get a pretty good return and maybe kind of enter into their next rebuild.
You mentioned Jalen Johnson and kind of the breakout season he's been having. What do you think has been the biggest factor in his development? Is it minutes or maybe the coaching change at the end of last year?
Yeah, I think Quinn Snyder is a little bit more of a creative offensive coach than Nate McMillan was. And so there's maybe more room in the offense for Johnson to kind of play his natural game rather than just fit into a specific role. I think the John Collins trade helped him out a lot too. Now there's no one blocking him for minutes at the 4. And I think he's a better fit for this team offensively and defensively than Collins was as well. So I think you're right to point out the minutes. Like, that's a big deal for him. When you're a young player, this is kind of the natural trajectory. Just having an opportunity once you've proven yourself ready for it. I think we see this with Jonathan Kuminga in Golden State, for instance, too. Just a young guy who clearly belongs at the NBA level, and now he just kind of needs room to explore the studio space a little bit. I think that's been huge for Jalen Johnson, and we'll see where it goes for him. He's, I think, already proven that he's going to be a good NBA player. The question now is, can he be a great NBA player? I don't know. We'll see. He's shown a lot of encouraging flashes, but you always got to kind of solidify yourself by proving it year over year at that level. And consistency is always the thing that separates great from good in the NBA. So I think the next 2 years are going to be really telling for the rest of his career.
So moving off of the Hawks for a little bit, moving on to something you covered on your latest podcast episode, Boston's weaknesses in the playoffs. How do you feel that teams are going to continue to guard Boston throughout the playoffs? I know some teams like the Nuggets put Jokic onto Drew Holiday, and I believe the Bucks do the same with Brook Lopez. Do you feel that is a solution that many teams will turn to?
I think teams will try that. I mean, there's really no good solution with Boston. They just, they don't have that really high level offensive player who can just sort of create something from nothing in the highest leverage situations, but they have such great continuity. They have such great ball movement. They've got so much shooting. I don't think they need that kind of guy, that LeBron, that Steph type of player, Embiid, who you just give the ball to and say, go create something. I think they do it differently. And so that makes them hard to guard because you need a lot of answers on the perimeter. You need multiple guys who can guard in isolation, who can get over screens. And then you still need rim protection and you still need backline help. And so I would expect to see teams try, hiding defenders on Drew Holiday, making him prove that he can beat them from three, which he might, but there's really not a better answer against Boston. Unless you just want to play everything straight up and make Tatum beat you, that may not be a bad option either. But, that's easier said than done because Boston's really creative offensively. And, you might try to make them isolate a million times with Jason Tatum, but they may not want to do that. They may just choose that's not how we're going to play. We're going to play our continuity style, and you have to deal with that instead.
Are they your pick to come out of the East?
Yeah, I think pretty clearly they have to be at this point. That's not to say they're infallible or that they can't be beaten. But right now, especially with the Sixers being so banged up and Embiid being out, I saw Philly as their biggest threat. And I think right now it's hard to see another team that rises to that level where they'd take them. I mean, yeah, could you get a couple games off of them in a playoff series? Sure. Winning 4 out of 7 against that team, what looks like could be an all-time juggernaut in the regular season, that's going to be really tough.
Hey, the Heat are at 8 right now. I know the Celtics don't want the Heat in the first
They
round.
don't. I don't think they do. And the Sixers too are a team that I don't think wants to see the Heat or the Celtics. I think if the Sixers fell to the 7 seed and somehow wound up in the 8 via the play-in, I think that would be bad news for them.
Yeah, I would really love to know your thoughts on the race at the top of the West. It's really a 3-horse race there. Each team, the Wolves, the Nuggets, and the Thunder are just separated by one or a half game. Who do you feel has the best chance to come out on top of that down the stretch here?
I lean toward Denver, mostly because we've seen them go through the playoff gauntlet before. We've seen how I guess both ends of the floor, how that scales in a playoff series, how their offense holds up against really dialed in defenses. And how their defense holds up against high-level offenses. I thought their series against the Suns last year was pretty good evidence that you can build a pretty high-level defense, even with Nikola Jokic as your defensive anchor. And then their offense, I just think there's not really anything you can do. They have maybe the best offensive player of all time. They've got perfectly fitting pieces around him, and they're just always going to be able to score. No matter who their opponent, no matter what the defensive approach, they're always going to be able to score. We know that. We've seen that in the playoffs. Oklahoma City, based on just this regular season, I would be inclined to put them neck and neck with Denver. I just think the playoffs are such a different game, especially in this day and age, that having seen none of their players, at least as they currently exist within the structure of that team, having seen none of those players really prove themselves in the postseason before, just gives me a little bit of pause. Not that they can't go through the West, not that they can't win the championship, just that I'm not as inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt because I haven't seen it. And then Minnesota is really interesting because I think they're the weakest of those 3 teams. I don't trust their offense very much because it's very Anthony Edwards isolation dependent, which I'm not really sure how far that takes you in the postseason. But they match up really well with Denver when they're at full strength. They played last night, but both of their centers, Gobert and Towns, were injured. So I don't put too much stock into that. But I think we saw in last year's postseason, they matched up in kind of an interesting way with Jokic, where they can put Towns on Jokic, have Gobert as the help defender, and really maintain elite rim protection and have a big body on Jokic to contend with him simultaneously, which is not something that a lot of teams can do. So I think they could pose challenges to Denver's offense. I just don't think that their offense is going to hold up well enough to really make it through some of these high-level playoff defenses in the West.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I want to talk a little bit about the Thunder, like you mentioned, them not having that experience. But the one time we did see Shea in the playoffs, he took that really, really tough Warriors team to 6 games, I think it was, in that series. Made a big play at the end of a big pass at the end of the game. I've come on this podcast a ton and been a huge Shea supporter. What are your thoughts on the MVP race? Do you think that Shea is competing with Jokic, or Jokic is voter fatigue going to come in, or what's going to happen there?
Yeah, I think I would put Jokic a notch ahead of Shea right now. I think Shea has a little bit friendlier environment in which to work. Like, I think that Thunder offense is pretty well set up for him to succeed. And obviously the Nuggets offense is too, but it's set up that way because Jokic makes it that way, right? It's like he has these very relatively limited offensive players around him. Whereas the Thunder, I think, have kind of these really well-fitting pieces that they fit around Shea, which is not to take away from what he's done in that environment. And I also think just the level of command that Jokic has over every possession, Shea does this to an extent, but there's just no one in the NBA right now who you can give the ball to and just and trust to make something good happen in the way that Jokic does. He just forces the defense into uncomfortable positions in basically every possession. I mean, it's just in a way that no one else really can right now. So I think that combined with I think the Nuggets are a better team than the Thunder overall. I think I would give it to Jokic, and just knowing like what he is as an overall player. The voter fatigue thing, I actually think it could go the other way this year, because I think that came into play last year. He didn't win the MVP, and then he ends up winning Finals MVP, and the Nuggets win the championship. So if anything, I could actually see this being kind of a retroactive coronation and saying, actually, yeah, maybe you did deserve 3 straight MVPs. So we're gonna hand it to you this year.
I mean, yeah, both are having great seasons. But yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I have a question. Why is Luka not in the conversation?
That's a good question. I think it's just because the Mavs have been so inconsistent this year. But you could argue that they would be more consistent in a bad way if not for Luka. Like, to me, the thing with him, he's always kind of been in the fringes of the MVP conversation. And the thing I've always said about that is that I was waiting for him to put together a season where he's efficient as an individual player, where he's up in that like low to mid 60s true shooting percentage range, and the team offense has a correspondingly efficient is at a correspondingly efficient level, right? So efficient team offense, efficient individual offense at the same time in the same season. And he's finally doing that this season. He's putting together just a fantastic all-around offensive season. I think you could argue he's been the second best offensive player in basketball this year. The Mavs kind of fall apart without him on the court. He's obviously at the center of everything they do on that end of the floor. Kyrie's missed a ton of games, so there's been even more burden on Luka to kind of be the guy offensively. And he does something similar to what Jokic does, which is just like you give him the ball and he just kind of plays, he improvises until the defense reacts, and then he just makes a decision. He just reads how the defense responds to him, and then something good comes out of it. It's never predetermined. It's never overly prescribed. It's just like, we're going to give Luka the ball in an advantageous spot, let him create an advantage, and they get something good out of it on almost every possession.
Yeah, players like Jokic and players like Luka, like just like you mentioned them, I'm not saying they are LeBron James, but remind me of a LeBron James play style when he was younger, because, it's kind of LeBron brings up the ball, he drives and kicks, or he gets the screen, or he takes the shot. And I think for having a guy like that, like Luka and like Jokic, guys that make ridiculous shots also out of nowhere, is just extremely valuable, and is something that a lot of teams lack, and that's just going to take them far in the playoffs. I also think another point to bring up is we talked about the Celtics earlier. The Mavericks I think, got a little unlucky with Porzingis, kind of caught him at the wrong time of his career. He's matured now, I think, and really understands his role as, being that big guy that could shoot threes, and maybe he doesn't have to be that guy. What do you think has been, I guess, Porzingis' big impact for the Celtics this year?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the maturity in his game has been really noticeable. He seems to read the game just much more quickly and much more judiciously at this point in his career. He's also in a great environment. Like, I think a better environment for his particular skill set than he was in Dallas. It's a free-flowing offense. The ball moves, players move. It's like kind of that 2014 Spurs thing of like, you either pass, shoot, or dribble in the first second, and then you move it along. And he's gotten much better at moving it along. He's gotten better in the post, really refined that part of his game. That mid-range turnaround has become kind of a bread and butter shot for him this year. And then defensively, he just looks unbelievable. And he had that in Dallas too. That was there at this point in his career, but he's just been really good on the defensive end of the floor. I think you could argue he's been their best player this year. I don't think that I would make that argument, but he's certainly been one of the most underappreciated players in the NBA this year to me. I thought he was like a clear all-star this year, and was a little surprised that he didn't make the all-star team. But whatever comes of that, like I think he's going to be huge for them in the playoffs, and whatever success or failure even is going to happen for them in the playoffs is probably going to come down to him.
Staying on the topic of the Mavs, where do you kind of see them finishing this little 3-horse race for that last guaranteed playoff spot in the West between the Kings, Mavs, and the Suns?
That's a good question. I think at their best, the Mavs are better than either of those teams, and I don't think it's all that close. I think they clearly have the best player among those three teams. I just don't trust them enough. But, it's not like I trust the Suns a whole heck of a lot either. The Kings are probably the most consistent of those teams, but I don't think they have as high a ceiling. So it's kind of this I don't know. It's a no one's perfect in that group, I guess. I would tend to think the Mavs are the best team among those three. I think if it came if they can avoid the play-in, I think they clearly are going to be in better position, obviously. And I would like their chances in a play-in game better than I would the Suns or the Kings, just because I think that when they're at their best, I trust them to be at their best more than I trust the Suns, and I think that their best is better than the Kings.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. That's we're coming up close on our time here. Ben, we really appreciate having you on. Former IU student, Atlanta Hawks beat writer, former, and just follows the NBA and knows his stuff. We really appreciate you, Ben. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you,
appreciate
Ben.
y'all having me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun. He does know what he's talking about a lot.
Yeah,
He
he does.
follows the NBA really, really closely. But now we're going to get into our final segment at the buzzer. We're going to look ahead to the next week, maybe even talk a little March Madness. But I'm going to start with the game tonight. The game that's everyone's circled, number 2 Bucks against the number 1 Celtics in the East. We just talked about the Celtics, how they've had great regular season success. How much weight do you really put on this game tonight?
Well, that's a really big game for the Bucks. They're trying to climb out of that 2-3 spot they're sort of in. They're sort of floating between. I think ultimately the Bucks sort of have the 2 spot locked down. This game won't end up mattering that much because the Cavs are going to fall off and the Knicks are even fewer games behind that, and they don't have OG anymore, so it doesn't really even matter. I think the Bucks have the 2 seed pretty much locked up at this point. It's an exciting game that I will be watching Grambling State versus Montana State instead of. But
Keeps it honest, man.
That's fair. It's March, anything goes with these teams, right? Like you got to figure out who's going to beat Purdue, right?
yeah, that game will be clearly in the second half by the start of Bucks Celtics, but
Yeah. Any games that stick out to you, Gio?
Yeah, I really like the Thunder against the Bucks. I think Sunday, I believe, because I think it's a good test for the Thunder. Even though the Bucks aren't what they've been in recent years, they're a seasoned veteran playoff team, and that'll be a good test for this young Thunder team to see how they perform against a team like that.
Yeah, I think you bring up great points. Like, I'd love to see how the Bucks, how their defensive assignment is on Shea and how they decide to deal with him. And can Chet handle Giannis? Can he handle all that size? I don't know. But let's talk a little bit about March Madness.
Pause, man. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. Let's talk a little bit about March Madness. Who are some of your guys, favorite upset picks, favorite teams that you think can make runs? What are you guys thinking?
I really like Illinois, man, because I feel like they have a really, really high ceiling with Terrence Shannon Jr. I'm not saying they're going to win the tournament, but I feel like in a tournament setting, what you need is a team with a high ceiling, and they provide that on offense.
I have a strong dislike for Illinois, and I bet you do too.
Yeah. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Coleman Hawkins, I just don't like. And Terrence Shannon has his own problems, although he's very good.
Belly.
I really like New Mexico. I think they have everything to go, maybe not like that deep, but they could be a Sweet 16 team, and I would not be surprised. New Mexico has it. Also, if Colorado wins tonight against Boise State, I really like Colorado. They have Cody Williams. He's going to be a lottery pick. They have every tool and a somewhat easier side of the bracket. I think Colorado and New Mexico are my 2 sleeper picks.
I love New Mexico, but I
They're
think
so good.
that is such a tough first round matchup for them. Clemson is a good team.
They got it.
I think New Mexico goes to like Sweet 16, Elite 8, or they lose in the first round. Like, I don't think there's like
There's
I don't think
nowhere
there's
in
like
the
an in
middle. Nowhere in
between.
the
Like
middle.
they'll beat Baylor or Colgate next round. They'll beat Zona or something. I don't know. Like that team will either get hot or just dud immediately. So I do like that take. But one team I want to talk about, we talked about beating Purdue, TCU. This team, I think TCU, they got all the tools to beat Purdue. They're good on defensive side. You know, they have some good wins this season. I think this is the year that, or not this is the year, but this is the team that settles Purdue's fate, you know?
And a Purdue first round win alone is already better than their past 3 years. So
That is true. That is true.
Kind of became a part of their heritage. Purdue just losing the first round.
Another thing I want to mention is how stacked the East region is.
yeah,
UConn is your 1 seed. Your 2 seed is Iowa State, who I think is a very underrated team. Your 3 seed, as we just talked about, is Illinois. Your 4 seed is Auburn, who a lot of people have in the Final Four. They're like in the top 5 of odds to win the national championship. And BYU is a scary team too. Like I wouldn't want, when BYU gets hot from 3, they're not a team I'd want to face. Who do you guys think comes out of that East region?
I mean, ultimately, I'm taking UConn just all the way. I think they're essentially the same team as last year. They still have Klingon. They got some transfers in. They don't have Sonogo anymore, but they still have around the same team, and they're just a year more like veteran with the key players from last season. You're right, it is a hard region. I think the NCAA obviously did that like by design to try and have like not a repeat champion. But I believe in UConn. I think they're going to go all the way.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to agree. You know, consistency is key in a tournament like this, and I think they've shown that over the past 2 or 3 years. So I think they have a really good shot of getting out of the East.
Yeah. As much as I love to pick them to come out of the East, like I just can't put it in my bracket because it's too chalk. And like if UConn goes to the Final Four, like all right, my bracket's busted, sure. So I'll take Auburn over them just to be fun, just to be different. Because if that happens, you have a good chance of winning your bracket. But I still got more teams to talk about. I don't know about you guys. Like I think
I see Tennessee going all the way.
hold on, this is literally the most
Connect.
intriguing matchup to me is Creighton versus Tennessee. If they match up in the Sweet 16, I think this could be the winner of the tournament. This game.
Really?
Creighton versus Tennessee. I love both these teams. Creighton also returns a ton of players, made a deep run last year, have all the pieces to continue. And Dalton Connect, I know Tennessee doesn't have a great record in March. I might end up changing it, but I'm deciding between Creighton and Tennessee for who's coming out of that region, and probably, honestly, could be my potential champion.
Yeah, I mean, I like Tennessee. They did lose in the SEC playoffs pretty early. I think it was like the first game, even though Connect had 40, and that kind of worries me because he's sort of their entire team. They don't have much outside of him. So like even if he's dropping 40, which he like very easily could do, they still lost that game, and that could very easily happen again. Although I do have them going far as well.
Yeah, I think they play good defense, and their offense is really, really good too. So I think overall, I respect that pick. Them going pretty far in the tournament. I can see it.
Like I said, it's the Sweet 16. It's Creighton versus Tennessee. I'm stuck on that because I love both those teams. But I could keep going. I could keep going.
Wish we had time, man. Wish
Texas.
we had time.
Texas is also a really good team in that bracket.
make one more statement about them. One more statement about Texas.
One more statement about one team, totally different team, Kentucky.
Oh my goodness.
Kentucky.
Just changed the whole
Rob and
thing.
Reed.
Rob and Rashid and Sheed.
I love Rob.
I love them. I love them.
So good.
I have a future on them. I'll put that out there. I
Also,
have
they
for the
come off
last
the
2
bench.
months.
I know.
I didn't even know
It's
that.
like Devin Booker. Like
Yeah.
he's going to be a lottery pick that came off the bench at Kentucky. You know, this team, everyone talks about how they're young and how the young team, but they do have the veterans in there. It's just like they're not the best guys, but like Kentucky could make a run too. You know, I think this is going to be a really fun March, more fun than in a lot of recent years. So yeah.
Yeah.
Any closing statements from
If
you guys?
Michigan State wins their first game, they're going to the Sweet 16.
Okay,
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah.
First,
I like that. That's
Yeah.
not bad.
Illinois Final Four.
I hope
Nebraska's
not.
winning it all. No,
I'd
I'm
actually be
just
so
kidding.
upset.
Nebraska doing all Asian stuff. We cooked them in December. Come on.
Tominaga.
Nah, we didn't. Loki. All right. But that's going to be all for the Make It Take It podcast, talking all things NBA. Had our guest Ben Ladner today. Got a little March Madness talking today too. I'm Victor Kustin, Jason Myers on the buttons, Gio and Ethan, and peace out.